Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joseph Hewes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Okay, the Nuremberg Trials. I decided to do a part 2 to my Nuremberg Trials video. And if you haven't seen part 1 of the video, I will put a link to that video in the description of this video. So if you want to watch that, it'll be in the description. Okay, now, the purpose of creating that video, and subsequently this one, was I'm a big international relations buff. I'm also a big history buff. And of course, you have a master's degree in international relations, and a major component of that education was international law. Okay, now I'm not an international lawyer, but I do, like I said, I have studied international law, and I do understand international law. Now, the main problem I have when I study the Nuremberg Trials is you have to sift through American propaganda, okay? And I'm on YouTube, I'm looking for videos that will objectively expound upon the Nuremberg Trials, and there aren't any. The only thing you get is American propaganda. In other words, it's told from the American perspective, and it justifies the action, it justifies the trials, and it pretty much ordains everything they did as sound and perfect and within international law. Okay, now, it has been my contention that those trials were not held according to sound international law principles. That they were nothing more than a show trial, that Hermann Goering was right. This was victor's justice. Okay, now in the first video, I gave as a reason why I thought that these trials were illegitimate, that they lacked consent. Again, if you want to see that video, look in the description. I'll have a link to that video. Basically, the Germans were not party to any of the agreements that precipitated the trial. Okay? Okay, now there are additional reasons why the Nuremberg trials can be considered to be illegitimate. Okay, number one, the so-called crimes committed were not crimes according to international law before World War II. So think of it this way, just in a basic sense. Traffic laws. You have speed limit laws. I'm driving in a car right now. We have speed limit laws, and at some point there were no speed limit laws. If there are no speed limit laws, I can't be punished for breaking the speed limit, right? So the idea that they created laws and then retroactively punished the Germans for these laws is not sound legal principles, and that's what they did. Now, these laws we're talking about, crimes against peace, crimes against the peace, waging aggressive war. You know, in what world is war against the law? There is no world where war is against the law. War has been a method used by countries for 10,000 years to settle disputes. The only law of war is the stronger nation gets to win the war, basically. How many wars have we had since World War II? If waging war against another nation was against the law, why have we had so many wars since World War II? And why haven't we had war crimes every time we've had a war? So the idea that they created a law waging aggressive war and then charged the Germans with this law after the fact doesn't make sense. It's not sound international law principles. Okay, now as evidence for the actual events, the actual wars that they are claiming the Germans started, and obviously the Germans did start these wars. And I'm not taking the Nazis' point of view here. You don't think I'm defending the Nazis. I'm just defending sound international law principles. Breaking the peace. The claim is that when the Germans invaded Poland, they broke the peace, they engaged in aggressive war, and this is what they were charged with. Now see, there's one problem with that. Because while the Germans were invading on the west side of Poland, the Soviet Union was invading on the east side of Poland. So in effect, the Germans, in agreement with their erstwhile partners, the Soviet Union, both invaded Poland. Okay, sorry about that, folks. My battery died on the camera. So let me continue, okay? So basically we have a situation where the Germans have been accused of starting World War II, when in actuality, the Germans had an agreement with the Soviet Union to start World War II together. While the Germans were invading to the east, or while the Germans were invading from the west, 2 weeks later, the Russians invaded Poland from the east. September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. September 17th, 1939, their friends, their partners, the Soviet Union, invaded Poland from the east. Not only that, on November 30th, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. And between that time, they actually kind of bullied Estonia and Latvia and a couple other states to allow them to occupy their countries. So basically, Germany and the Soviet Union initiated World War II. And yet Germany is on trial, and the Soviet Union is one of the judges. Okay. Now, if you don't see a problem with that, you're blind. You're blind as a bat. That all by itself is enough to sink the Nuremberg Trials, the legitimacy of the Nuremberg Trials. The third issue is the Holocaust. Okay, of course, the Holocaust is one of the greatest crimes, and I'm using that term loosely. I'm using that term in a humanity sense, because what basically the Germans were accused of doing, and they actually did, was they murdered millions of their own citizens, not just Jews, but homosexuals and gypsies and political dissidents. The Holocaust was not 6 million people. The Holocaust was 6 million Jews plus 6 million other people. So actually the Holocaust was 12 million people. So obviously it's a crime against humanity in a very esoteric sense. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. But there's no law, there's no international law against murdering your own citizens. Every country has the death penalty. Some countries use the death penalty very liberally. North Korea. If you say something wrong, they'll execute you. Why isn't North Korea on trial? Communist countries for decades. If you tried to escape those communist countries, they'd shoot you. There's footage of people trying to escape East Germany being shot, being murdered. Okay, so what law was Germany breaking by executing its own citizens? Every country executes citizens that it deems to be criminals. Now, of course, the Holocaust, the Germans took that to extreme lengths, and by some kind of esoteric law of God or law of humanity, maybe we could say it's a crime. But there was no international law against executing your own citizens. not before World War II. And maybe there's genocide conventions or whatever, but I don't think those laws are well defined to the point where Germany can be charged with those things, or the individuals of a government can be charged. So the Nuremberg Trials have major problems with its legitimacy. And it was just a show trial. That's all it was. It was just a show trial. The Nazis were the bad guys. I would be inclined, and I can kind of refine on what Winston Churchill wanted. He said, "We're in a war. If you spot these Nazis, shoot them. We're fighting. Hey, they'll be casualties of the war. Just shoot them." And I don't think anybody would have complained for that happening. So, but the Nuremberg trials were a show trial. Now, I think I'm going to create a part 3 to this video where I discuss the legacy of the Nuremberg trial and the invented legacy. The Nuremberg has become kind of a foundation for many things that are taking place today. And as I've shown, it's a rickety foundation. It is an illegitimate foundation. So that will probably be part 3 of this video. But there's nothing on YouTube critical of the Nuremberg trials. And we think just because it's the Nazis, we can suspend sound principles of law. And Europe is replete with Nazi derangement syndrome. Of course, the Nazis are the bad guys, but the best way to expose them is to have openness and free speech and let the better ideas defeat the Nazis. So, yes, the Nazis were the bad guys, but that doesn't justify creating illegitimate mechanisms and then crowning them as legitimate. So anyways, this is Joseph Hewes. If you have any comments, put them in the comment section. I'd love to hear what you think about the legitimacy of the Nuremberg trials. And again, look for part 3 on this, on the legacy of the Nuremberg trials.